Mariana never expected her final years would be spent as a quiet shadow in her grandson's home. At 72, her only son recently gone, she had moved to Portland, Oregon, to live with Lucas and his wife, Rachel. While the loss was unbearable, the idea of being close to family had given her a sense of purpose. Yet, as the months wore on, her hope for peace faded. In this cold, modern house, she was merely tolerated, her existence reduced to maintaining Rachel's impeccable, spotless home. The arrangement began innocently enough. Lucas, busy with his job as an engineer, trusted that Rachel and his grandmother would keep each other company. Rachel, though, had other plans. Her expectations of Mariana grew quickly from simple help around the house to demanding chores, with criticism whenever things didn't meet her strict standards. What started as, "Would you mind tidying up?" soon turned into detailed instructions that Mariana dared not ignore. The house itself was beautiful, with high ceilings, large windows, and perfectly arranged furniture, but it felt as cold as Rachel's sharp looks. Mariana scrubbed, dusted, and cleaned, her arthritic hands aching from endless hours spent keeping the place pristine. Rachel's supervision was relentless. "Make sure you vacuum under the furniture," she'd say, barely looking up from her pee. Any mistake, a missed spot, a dish out of place, earned Mariana a look of disdain or worse, a reminder of how kind they'd been to take her in. Mariana wanted to believe her sacrifices were for Lucas. He had always been gentle with her, giving her a warm hug when he came home late from work, exhausted. But he was blind to Rachel's true nature, seeing only a caring wife who welcomed his grandmother into their home. Mariana didn't dare tell him otherwise. Rachel was always the perfect hostess around him, offering Mariana smiles that vanished as soon as he left the room. Yet beneath Rachel's facade, Mariana sensed something dark. Once, Rachel had pulled her aside, speaking just above a whisper. "If this arrangement doesn't work out, there are plenty of homes that specialize in caring for seniors like you. I can make a few calls if needed." The threat lingered, a reminder that her place here was conditional. Rachel didn't need to raise her voice. Her cold stare said everything. From that moment on, Mariana knew that any complaint, any slip, could mean losing the last bit of family she had. Outside these walls, life continued. Mariana found small relief in the brief moments when she went outside, usually to take out the trash or get the mail. One afternoon, while at the mailbox, she noticed a neighbor, Clara, watching her from across the street. Clara, a woman in her 50s with a kind smile, often greeted her with a warm, "How are you, Mariana?" Clara's concern seemed genuine, her gaze lingering a little too long on Mariana's tired face. Mariana wanted to say more, to open up, but the words stuck in her throat, her fear stronger than her loneliness. She simply smiled and replied, "I'm fine, dear. Thank you." Back in the house, the routine continued. Mariana worked quietly, hiding her exhaustion and sorrow behind a mask of compliance. At night, she would lie in her small, dim room, gripping the cross she wore around her neck, whispering her son's name, wishing he were here. The ache in her heart was heavy, the silence oppressive, but somehow she held on, telling herself it was for Lucas. As hard as it was, she couldn't bear the thought of leaving, not while he still needed her. Still, each day felt like a step further from her dignity, her sense of self slipping away under Rachel's control. She couldn't shake the feeling of isolation, trapped between a duty to her grandson and the fear of Rachel's threats. In the quiet hours, she clung to a small, fragile hope that someone, somewhere would see her struggle. Until then, Mariana knew she had to survive one day at a time, waiting for any sign of change in a world that seemed to have forgotten her. Mariana's role in the household had become clearer with each passing day. As she went about her tasks in silence, Rachel's demands grew harsher, her patience shorter. One morning, as Mariana scrubbed the kitchen counters after breakfast, Rachel appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, a tight smile on her face. "Is that how you clean, Mariana?" she asked, her voice laced with contempt. "I shouldn't have to go over everything again just because you can't keep up." Mariana swallowed, nodding quietly as she redid her work, feeling the burn of humiliation rise in her chest. She told herself it was a small price to pay to stay close to Lucas, but Rachel's words chipped away at her dignity. Each day the rules seemed to shift. One morning it was the spotless windows, the next a perfectly made bed. Rachel found new ways to point out Mariana's shortcomings, always watching, ready to correct, her eyes sharp and unrelenting. One evening, Lucas brought up the idea of taking Mariana out for dinner. He was cheerful, oblivious to the tension that filled the room. "How about it, Grandma? We could go to that Italian place down the street," he said, looking at her with the warmth she missed so much. Mariana's heart swelled with gratitude. A night out felt like a glimmer of her old life, a brief escape from Rachel's scrutiny. But as Lucas suggested the outing, she caught the flicker of annoyance in Rachel's eyes. With a quick smile, Rachel leaned into Lucas's side, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "Oh, honey, that's so sweet," Rachel said, her voice smooth. "But you know how Grandma gets tired. Besides, I'm sure she'd be more comfortable here, right, Mariana?" Rachel's gaze lingered, her meaning clear. Mariana nodded, feeling a pang of disappointment as her chance at a reprieve slipped away. "Yes, of course, Rachel," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. That night, as she lay in her small room, the weight of isolation pressed heavily on her. She knew Rachel wouldn't tolerate Lucas's attention shifting toward her for long. Any chance of bonding with her grandson would be quickly cut off. The warning was clear. Mariana was here as long as she remained invisible. But despite her fear, a tiny spark of rebellion stirred in her heart. She hadn't come here to be erased. A few days later, Rachel's demands escalated. She instructed Mariana to clean the garage, a space cluttered with heavy boxes and unused tools. Mariana's joints ached as she worked, her hands trembling from the strain, but Rachel's threats echoed in her mind, pushing her to continue. Hours later, as she was finally stacking the last box, Rachel appeared in the doorway, her arms crossed. "Don't think you can take shortcuts just because you're tired," Rachel snapped. "Lucas expects a clean home, and I won't be the one telling him his grandmother can't handle it." Her voice was ice cold, and Mariana felt the familiar sting of shame. "Yes, Rachel," she whispered, her voice barely audible. As Mariana's workload grew, she became increasingly withdrawn, her quiet obedience the only shield against Rachel's wrath. Lucas, always busy and blissfully unaware, seemed content with the surface harmony in his home, unaware of the battles Mariana faced each day. But as her despair deepened, so did her loneliness. It was during one of her brief trips outside, under the pretense of checking the mailbox, that she ran into Clara again. Clara, ever attentive, took one look at Mariana's weary face and frowned. "Mariana, are you all right?" Clara asked gently, her eyes scanning Mariana's expression. Mariana's instinct was to smile and assure her she was fine, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she nodded, managing a weak smile before retreating into the house. But Clara's face stayed with her, a reminder that someone saw her, that her suffering wasn't invisible to everyone. Over the following weeks, Rachel's behavior intensified. She seemed to sense Mariana's growing weariness and seized every opportunity to remind her of her place. The small kindnesses Lucas offered, an occasional chat over breakfast, a compliment on a meal, became rare as Rachel found subtle ways to keep them apart. Mariana was reduced to the role of an invisible housekeeper, her once warm relationship with her grandson fading under the weight of Rachel's control. One night, as she prepared Lucas's dinner, Rachel pulled her aside, her tone harsh and "Listen carefully, Mariana," she hissed. "If you think you're going to complain to Lucas, think again. I won't hesitate to make sure you end up somewhere less comfortable. Do you understand?" The threat was clear, and Mariana's heart sank. She had no choice but to nod, feeling trapped and helpless. Back in her room, Mariana sat on the edge of her bed, clutching her hands in her lap, her mind racing. She didn't know how much longer she could endure this life, but the fear of Rachel's threats held her in place, a prisoner in the only family home she had left. Yet, a part of her yearned for something more, a hope that she could one day escape this silent suffering. that perhaps Clara or someone else might notice the truth before it was too late. For now, all Mariana could do was endure, clinging to the faint hope that her spirit wouldn't be crushed by Rachel's cruelty. Her days were a quiet fight, one that no one saw but her, a battle to preserve the last shreds of dignity and hope in a world that felt increasingly closed off and cold. As weeks turned into months, the dynamics between Mariana, Lucas, and Rachel grew more strained, though Lucas remained oblivious. Mariana watched her grandson drift further into his work, his time at home dominated by late-night phone calls and projects that consumed him. The rare moments he had free, he spent with Rachel, unaware of the bitterness that brewed in the background. Rachel seemed to sense Mariana's growing isolation and used it to her advantage. She sharpened her control over Mariana with careful precision, maintaining her flawless image while subtly enforcing Mariana's silence. Every chore Mariana completed, every meal prepared, and every task done perfectly kept Rachel's approval in place, but at the cost of Mariana's sense of worth. The pressure of this life, of these thankless tasks, and the ever-present threat of Rachel's disapproval wore Mariana down. She carried a quiet exhaustion with her each day, and Lucas's cheerful, untroubled greetings began to feel like reminders of her invisibility in his life. She saw the way his eyes softened for Rachel, the way he trusted her completely, and it made her feel trapped, as if her words would fall on deaf ears even if she dared to speak. In rare moments when she was alone with Lucas, she considered saying something, dropping hints of her struggles, but each time she hesitated. She feared his disappointment and the possibility that he might side with Rachel, leaving her utterly alone. The thought silenced her every time, and she would smile instead, acting as though everything was fine. Outside of the household, however, Mariana began to find an unexpected source of comfort. Clara, her neighbor, seemed to appear more often, as if sensing Mariana's need for connection. On one brisk autumn morning, as Mariana stepped outside to take a breath of fresh air, Clara waved her over from across the street. They met by the fence, and Mariana could feel the concern radiating from Clara. "You look tired, Mariana," Clara said gently, her eyes soft but attentive. "Is everything all right? You know, I'm here if you ever want to talk." For a brief moment, Mariana felt the weight of her burdens lessen. She knew she had to be careful, but Clara's kindness made her want to confide in someone, even just a little. "It's just a lot," she replied quietly, looking down at her hands. "I help out around the house as much as I can. Rachel, she has high expectations." Clara's eyebrows knitted together, and she seemed to study Mariana closely, as if seeing the unspoken pain in her face. "Well, if you ever need a hand, or if you want a break, just let me know," Clara offered, her voice warm. "I'm just across the street any time." Mariana nodded, feeling a glimmer of relief. Clara's offer was like a tiny crack in the wall that Rachel had built around her, a small chance to feel seen. She thanked her, careful not to reveal too much, but the brief exchange stayed with her, giving her a small sense of comfort in the long hours of solitude. Back at the house, Rachel seemed to sense something different. That afternoon, as Mariana scrubbed the bathroom tiles, Rachel appeared in the doorway, her arms crossed. "Making friends now, are we?" she asked, her voice sharp. Mariana felt a prickle of unease. She hadn't told Rachel about her chat with Clara, but it was as if Rachel had eyes everywhere. "Clara just said hello. She's a nice woman," Mariana said, keeping her tone neutral. Rachel's expression hardened, her eyes narrowing. "It's best to keep to ourselves, don't you think? We wouldn't want anyone getting the wrong idea." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Mariana understood it was a warning, a reminder that even her smallest connections were under Rachel's control. The days that followed were harder. Mariana found herself retreating into silence, avoiding the few opportunities she had to see Clara. She didn't want to risk Rachel's anger, but she missed those small moments of kindness, the brief reminders that someone cared. Clara continued to wave whenever she saw her, a quiet signal that the offer of help still stood. But Mariana forced herself to look away, fearing that even a nod might spark Rachel's suspicions. Rachel's control extended to every part of Mariana's life, not just in the tasks she assigned, but in the way she manipulated Lucas's perception. Rachel began subtly framing Mariana's efforts as part of her old-fashioned ways, telling Lucas, "Your grandma just loves keeping herself busy. It gives her poo." Lucas, unaware of the harsh reality, would nod and smile, thanking Mariana in passing but never questioning the demands placed on her. Rachel's words created a narrative in which Mariana's hard work was just a habit, her compliance a choice, and it kept Lucas from ever seeing the truth. Mariana felt trapped, aware of the false version of her life being presented to her grandson. She wondered if he could ever understand the quiet despair that filled her days, or if he would simply continue believing Rachel's fabrications. The walls of silence around her seemed to grow thicker, her voice more stifled with each passing day. Still, she held on to Clara's kindness, that sliver of hope that someone saw her suffering. Though the days grew colder and Rachel's control tighter, Mariana clung to that faint connection, her quiet rebellion against the life Rachel forced upon her. It was a small comfort, but in a world that felt increasingly dark, even the smallest glimmer of hope felt like a lifeline. The strain of Mariana's daily life was beginning to show, though she fought to hide it. Rachel's demands only increased, and each day seemed to bring a new set of tasks or a fresh insult, disguised as a reminder of her place. Mariana was exhausted, her body aching from the constant work. But even beyond the physical toll, she felt her spirit wearing down, like a candle burning at both ends. Rachel was unrelenting. Each morning, she would hand Mariana a list of chores, everything from scrubbing the floors to organizing storage boxes in the attic, a space filled with dust and clutter that hadn't been touched in years. Every task was expected to be completed perfectly, and Rachel made it clear that any mistake could have consequences. "We wouldn't want you getting hurt trying to keep up, would we?" Rachel would say with a smile that barely masked the threat underneath. The attic, in particular, had become a grueling task. The ceiling was low, and the heavy boxes held things Rachel had no interest in going through herself. It was as if she was testing Mariana's endurance, pushing her to see how much she could handle before breaking. Mariana would spend hours crouched in the dim light, sorting through dusty boxes and bags, her fingers swollen and raw from the weight of it all. When she finished, Rachel would inspect the space, often finding something out of place just to remind Mariana that her efforts were never enough. Lucas was as distant as ever, his presence more of a shadow in the house than a comfort. He'd come home late, exhausted, and while he'd always give Mariana a warm greeting, he was quick to retreat to his study or fall asleep on the couch. The life Mariana had once dreamed of, where they would share dinners and conversations, had been replaced by a cold routine in which she barely felt seen. She missed the connection they used to have, the laughter and warmth she once knew with her son, and found herself clinging to small memories, fleeting moments that Rachel's control couldn't erase. Rachel's control extended beyond just chores, as she began limiting Mariana's movements even more. If she lingered too long at the mailbox or exchanged a word with Clara, Rachel would find an excuse to keep her indoors, assigning new tasks at odd hours or insisting that Mariana clean an already spotless room. It was clear that Rachel resented any interaction Mariana might have outside the house, especially with Clara. She seemed intent on ensuring that Mariana remained isolated, bound to a life of silence and servitude within the walls of the house. One afternoon, as she was washing the kitchen floor, Mariana heard the doorbell ring. Her heart leapt, hoping it might be Clara or someone else who could offer even a brief respite. She quickly dried her hands and opened the door, only to find Clara standing on the doorstep with a concerned look. "Hi, Mariana. I thought I'd bring over some fresh muffins I baked. I thought you might like a little treat," Clara said, her voice warm and genuine. But before Mariana could even thank her, Rachel appeared behind her, her presence looming over the doorway. "Thank you, Clara, but we're quite all right," Rachel said curtly, stepping in front of Mariana to take the plate. "Mariana has her hands full right now, but I'll be sure to let her enjoy these later." Her tone left no room for argument, and Clara's smile faltered slightly as she glanced between them, clearly picking up on the tension. Mariana felt a surge of humiliation and frustration, but she kept her head down, nodding quietly as Rachel closed the door on Clara without so much as a proper thank you. She watched as Rachel placed the plate of muffins on the counter, her face twisting into a look of irritation. "You don't need to be wasting time at the door," she muttered, brushing past Mariana without another word. The exchange stayed with Mariana, haunting her as she moved through her chores. Clara's visit, though brief, had given her a glimpse of the kindness and humanity she longed for, something she hadn't felt in so long. But Rachel's quick intervention reminded her how powerless she truly was, how little control she had over her own life. That evening, as she lay in bed, Mariana felt a growing sense of despair. She clutched the cross around her neck, whispering a quiet prayer for strength, for the courage to hold on even as each day grew more difficult. The isolation, the constant work, and Rachel's relentless control were chipping away at her, leaving her feeling hollow and tired. But a part of her refused to give in completely. Clara's kindness, even interrupted, had lit a small spark within her, a reminder that the world outside still held something good. She clung to the hope that somehow she might find a way to regain a sense of freedom, to escape the silent prison Rachel had built around her. And though Rachel's watchful eye remained unyielding, Mariana allowed herself a fleeting thought. One day, maybe she wouldn't have to endure this. One day perhaps she could find the strength to reach out, to let someone know what her life had become. Until then, she would continue, holding on to the small moments that reminded her of her worth, her resilience, and the possibility of a life beyond these walls. As fall settled over Portland, with grey skies and rain casting a gloom around the house, Mariana felt an even heavier weight pressing down on her spirit. The days blurred together in a pattern of relentless chores and careful silence. Her life had become a series of quiet routines dictated by Rachel's shifting demands. Yet in the stillness of the late evening, alone in her small room, Mariana felt something stirring within her, a flicker of resolve, a need to consider what her life had become and what choices, if any, remained. One night, after Lucas and Rachel had gone to bed, Mariana sat on her bed, her tired hands folded in her lap. She thought of her old life, the warmth of her home in California, the friends who had once been close, and most of all, her son. Memories of him were bittersweet. His laugh, his gentle encouragements, his phone calls checking in on her even when he was busy. He had raised Lucas with the same values, and she knew he'd never want this life for her. The thought filled her with both sadness and a strange determination. If he could see her now, bound in silence and servitude, he would want her to stand up, to reclaim her voice. But could she? Her mind returned to Clara, whose concern had been a small light in Mariana's darkened world. Clara had seen her struggle, though Mariana had tried to hide it. The memory of Clara's kind eyes and warm voice made her wonder if she could finally confide in someone, if maybe telling her story could help lift this burden. But as quickly as the thought came, so did the fear. Rachel's threats echoed in her mind, the constant reminder that her place here was precarious, conditional. Rachel's promise to send her to a care facility felt real, like a trap waiting to close if she made one wrong move. But the idea wouldn't go away. The thought of confiding in someone, of telling her truth even to one person, became a lifeline, a possible escape from this silence. Mariana was frightened, but she also realized that keeping quiet was draining her of any sense of self. She wondered if she could trust Clara, if perhaps the neighbor's kindness was genuine enough to hold her secret without bringing harm. For the first time in months, she felt as though she were standing on the edge of a choice, one that could change everything. Yet making it felt like stepping off a ledge into an unknown darkness. The next morning, as she prepared breakfast alone in the kitchen, Mariana's mind churned with these thoughts, caught between fear and hope. Rachel entered the kitchen, scanning the countertops, as if checking for any excuse to criticize her. "Good, you're on top of things today," Rachel muttered, offering a brief, disingenuous smile before grabbing her coffee and heading out of the room. Mariana watched her go, the bitterness of Rachel's words lingering in the air. The moment only deepened her longing to break free from this oppression, to finally speak out. Later that day, when Lucas left for work and Rachel was out on errands, Mariana found herself standing by the window, looking out toward Clara's house across the street. She noticed Clara's car in the driveway, and she knew this might be her only chance to speak openly, without Rachel nearby. Her heart raced as she considered the risk. She felt torn, but a voice inside her, one that sounded like her son's, urged her to take this step, to trust that someone else could help her carry this burden. Gathering her courage, Mariana stepped out the front door, clutching her coat tightly around her shoulders against the brisk autumn air. Her hands trembled, but she crossed the street, feeling as though every step carried both fear and hope. When she reached Clara's door, she took a deep breath and knocked, the sound loud in the morning quiet. Clara opened the door, her expression shifting to one of surprise, quickly followed by warmth. "Mariana, it's so good to see you. Come in, she said, gesturing her inside. Clara's home was cozy and inviting, filled with soft light and the smell of fresh coffee. Mariana's anxiety eased a little as Clara led her to the couch and sat beside her. After a moment of silence, Clara asked gently, "Is everything okay, Mariana?" Mariana looked down, the words tangled in her throat. Her instinct was to smile and deflect, but she knew that this was the moment. She took a shaky breath, and with a voice barely above a whisper, she replied, "No, things are not okay." Her confession felt heavy, but also like a weight lifting, as if saying the words out loud was the first step toward something new. Clara's face softened, and she reached out, placing a comforting hand on Mariana's. "I'm here. You can tell me anything," she said, her voice filled with kindness and patience. Slowly, hesitantly, Mariana began to speak, sharing the smallest pieces of her daily life. The work, the silence, the constant fear of Rachel's threats. She avoided specifics, afraid of saying too much, but Clara listened intently, nodding, her eyes filled with understanding. "Mariana, you don't deserve this," Clara said firmly, her words carrying a quiet strength. "No one has the right to treat you this way. I'm here for you, whatever you need." For the first time, Mariana felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that someone finally saw her suffering. She thanked Clara, her voice choked with emotion, and returned home with a newfound resolve. She didn't know what would come next, but she felt a small, precious spark of strength kindling within her. Perhaps, she thought, this choice, this one act of trust, might be the beginning of her freedom. Mariana's decision to confide in Clara had been terrifying, but it left her with a quiet sense of strength she hadn't felt in years. For the first time, she'd acknowledged her suffering out loud, and Clara's support, her unwavering kindness, had become a beacon in Mariana's darkened world. Yet as comforting as Clara's presence was, it also brought a new risk. Rachel was watchful, and even the smallest hint of Mariana stepping out of line could lead to consequences she wasn't prepared to face. One morning, as Mariana prepared breakfast, Rachel entered the kitchen with a look that sent a chill through her. Rachel seemed to scrutinize every movement Mariana made, as if waiting for a mistake. After a long, tense silence, Rachel spoke in a soft but menacing voice. "I noticed you spent some time with Clara the other day. She's a nosy one, isn't she?" Mariana felt her chest tighten, but she forced herself to stay calm, replying as casually as she could. "We just talked for a moment. She was being friendly." Rachel's smile was thin and cold. "I'm sure she was. But I think it's best if you don't give people the wrong impression about us, don't you think?" She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "One complaint, Mariana. Just one, and I'll make sure you end up somewhere less comfortable." Mariana nodded, her heart pounding. Rachel's threat was clear, and it reminded her of the delicate position she was in. Her small act of courage in reaching out to Clara had now turned into a silent game of survival. If Rachel suspected even a hint of rebellion, she would have the power to sever the last of Mariana's connections to family, leaving her in an unfamiliar place with no one by her side. The pressure only increased after that day. Rachel's demands grew harsher, her expectations stricter. She assigned Mariana longer lists of chores, criticizing even the smallest errors. Each day felt like an endless loop of cleaning, cooking, and fearful silence. Lucas remained as oblivious as ever, engrossed in work, unaware of the silent war waged within his home. Mariana felt like a ghost in her own life, her identity dissolving under Rachel's dominance. Clara continued to wave to her from across the street, but Mariana kept her distance, fearing Rachel would see. Yet despite her fear, she found herself looking forward to those brief glimpses of Clara, those tiny, reassuring signs that someone knew her struggle. She treasured the words Clara had told her that day, the simple reminder that she didn't deserve this treatment, that someone saw her suffering. Then, one afternoon, as she was scrubbing the kitchen floor, Clara appeared at the window, holding up a small note and tapping gently on the glass. Mariana's heart skipped a beat as she glanced around, confirming Rachel was upstairs. She quickly opened the window just enough to slip the note inside, then watched as Clara gave her an encouraging nod before disappearing back toward her house. Mariana's hands trembled as she unfolded the note, her eyes scanning Clara's neat handwriting. "If you ever need a way out, I'm here. Don't let fear hold you back. You're stronger than you know." The note filled Mariana with a quiet, fierce determination. Clara's words echoed in her mind for days, lifting her spirits in moments of exhaustion, giving her a sense of courage she thought she'd lost. Though she couldn't make any outward changes yet, something within her had shifted. She began to think of ways she might regain control, tiny acts of resistance that might help her find her voice again. Rachel seemed to sense Mariana's subtle shift in attitude. She'd watch Mariana even more closely, taking any opportunity to assert her dominance. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Rachel turned to Lucas, her tone falsely sweet. "Lucas, don't you think it's wonderful how Grandma stays so busy with the house? She insists on doing everything herself. It's like she's trying to prove something." Lucas looked at Mariana with a puzzled smile. "Is that true, Grandma? You know you don't have to do so much." Mariana wanted to respond, to tell him that the work was far from her choice, but the look in Rachel's eyes silenced her. She forced a small smile, nodding. "I just like staying active," she said softly, swallowing the bitterness that rose in her throat. Lucas accepted the answer without question, turning back to his meal, but the interaction left Mariana feeling hollow. Her words twisted into Rachel's narrative once again. That night, Mariana lay awake. Clara's note clutched tightly in her hand, a silent promise to herself that she would hold on a little longer. The realization hit her hard. If she wanted to survive this, she couldn't do it by playing Rachel's game. She had to find her own strength, a way to reclaim her life without waiting for permission. Clara's note had been a lifeline, a reminder that she was not as alone as Rachel wanted her to feel. The following morning, with Clara's words still echoing in her mind, Mariana began making small changes. She carried herself a little straighter, took a few moments longer to gaze out the window, to feel the sun on her face, and even allowed herself a faint smile whenever she thought of the tiny rebellion growing within her heart. She knew the risks of angering Rachel, but the possibility of freedom had reignited a spark of resilience. As she moved through her daily tasks, she felt Rachel's gaze follow her, the tension between them thickening. Mariana's silent resistance was a small victory, a seed of defiance that Rachel could sense but not yet crush. She held Clara's note close, knowing that one day it might be her key to a life free from fear and isolation. For now, she would bide her time, trusting that this quiet courage would guide her through the darkness. The small acts of defiance that Mariana carried out each day, as subtle as they were, had started to give her a renewed sense of self. Clara's note, kept carefully hidden in her bedside drawer, had become her reminder that a life beyond Rachel's control was possible. And although Rachel remained as vigilant as ever, Mariana's heart was beginning to hold a quiet determination she had not felt in years. Yet it was not until she uncovered a hidden piece of Rachel's past that she realized just how deep the deception went, and how much was truly at stake. One chilly autumn afternoon, while Mariana was cleaning the basement, She stumbled upon a small, locked box, tucked away behind a row of old paint cans. She was familiar with most of the clutter in the basement, but this box was something she hadn't seen before. Its silver edges were worn, and there was a faint layer of dust, as though it had been undisturbed for a long time. Curiosity tugged at her, but she hesitated, knowing Rachel's temper too well to take such a risk lightly. Yet, as she cleaned, the box kept catching her eye. Something about it felt out of place, hidden, secretive. She found herself wondering what Rachel might keep locked away from even Lucas's sight. After a moment's hesitation, Mariana carefully moved the box, discovering that the lock was old and slightly loose. Taking a shaky breath, she twisted a small, narrow tool she'd found on a nearby shelf into the lock, and with a quiet click, it opened. Inside, she found documents and photographs, worn and yellowed with age. Her eyes scanned the first page, a legal document bearing Rachel's name. But it wasn't the name Mariana expected. It was a completely different last name, one she didn't recognize. As she flipped through the documents, she realized that they detailed a past Rachel had kept hidden, a history of debts, legal issues, and even a brief record of time spent in a correctional facility. The papers revealed a side of Rachel that she'd managed to hide entirely from Lucas and from anyone else who knew her now. Mariana's hands trembled as she took in the implications of what she'd found. Rachel, with her perfect facade and high expectations, had a past she was desperately concealing. Mariana carefully replaced everything and closed the box, her heart racing with a mix of fear and newfound power. For the first time she held something over Rachel, a secret that could shift the balance of control. It was a revelation that brought her both relief and caution. When she returned upstairs, her mind buzzed with questions. Had Rachel married Lucas out of genuine love, or was there another motive? Was she using Mariana's silence to protect her carefully constructed life, fearing that if Mariana ever revealed her mistreatment, her past might come to light? Mariana couldn't shake the feeling that Rachel's threats of sending her away weren't just about control. They were about keeping Mariana's influence far from Lucas's trust. As days passed, this hidden no, she watched Rachel differently, noticing the small cracks in her demeanor, the brief moments of unease that showed whenever Lucas brought up their future. Mariana saw through Rachel's carefully curated smiles and realized that fear, not strength, drove her cruelty. The realization that Rachel was as vulnerable as she was gave Mariana strength. She could see that Rachel's control wasn't as unbreakable as it seemed, and that knowledge planted a small but vital sense of hope. But even with this newfound power, Mariana knew she had to tread carefully. She couldn't reveal what she knew without endangering herself further. Instead, she decided to observe, to gather more insight, carefully watching for opportunities where this knowledge might serve her. Her resolve grew each day, and though Rachel continued her daily criticisms and threats, they no longer cut as deeply. Mariana had something Rachel didn't know about, something she could use one day when the moment was real. In the quiet of her room at night, she thought often of Clara and the words in her note. Clara's simple reminder of her strength had sparked this change, had helped Mariana see her own resilience. And now, with this secret knowledge, she was beginning to feel that one day she might have the power to break free from Rachel's grip. She even allowed herself to imagine a life where Lucas would know the truth, where he would finally see her for who she was and not the silent shadow Rachel painted her to be. One evening, as Rachel went out to run errands, Mariana found herself looking across the street to Clara's house, her thoughts filled with both gratitude and anticipation. She knew she couldn't reveal what she'd found to Clara, not yet, but she felt the strength of their quiet alliance strengthening within her. Clara's kindness had been her first glimpse of escape, and now, armed with Rachel's hidden secrets, Mariana felt a newfound resolve, an understanding that her silence was a choice she controlled. For the first time in years, Mariana's life felt like it held possibilities beyond survival. And though her steps remained careful, her mind raced with plans, each one lighting the way toward a future where she could finally reclaim her dignity, her voice, and perhaps even her place in Lucas's life as more than a ghost in her own home. She knew the road ahead was fraught with risks, but now, with the power of Rachel's secrets in her hands, she was prepared to face whatever lay ahead. Mariana's discovery of Rachel's hidden past had sparked a new hope within her, a quiet determination that grew with each passing day. She carried herself differently now, her posture straighter, her gaze steadier. She no longer flinched at Rachel's commands or criticisms, knowing that she held something Rachel feared. This change didn't go unnoticed, and Rachel's eyes narrowed each time she sensed Mariana's defiance. But Mariana kept her secret close, watching and waiting for the right moment. One Saturday morning, as Lucas prepared to go on a work trip, he pulled Mariana aside, smiling warmly. "Grandma, are you sure you're all right here? I know you've been doing a lot," he said, his voice filled with concern. For a brief moment, Mariana considered telling him everything, the truth of her life under Rachel's control, her daily toil, and her silent suffering. But then she saw Rachel standing in the doorway, her face calm but her eyes cold, daring her to speak. Mariana forced a smile, nodding. "I'm fine, Lucas. Just glad to help however I can," she replied, suppressing the bitterness that threatened to rise in her voice. Lucas kissed her cheek, his usual warmth making the deception sting. As he left, the weight of her silence pressed down on her, but she reminded herself that she was waiting for the right moment, one that would come when she was ready. Later that day, with Lucas away and Rachel out running errands, Mariana took the opportunity to visit Clara. She knew that Clara's support was crucial, that she needed to share her discovery to make it real. When she arrived, Clara welcomed her with open arms, guiding her inside to the comfort of her cozy living room. Mariana hesitated, but Clara's gentle gaze urged her on. "There's something you need to know," she whispered, her voice wavering. She told Clara about the box, the documents she had found, the legal troubles and secrets hidden in Rachel's past. As she spoke, Clara's face shifted from surprise to a determined resolve. "Mariana," she said firmly, "this is serious. Lucas deserves to know the truth." Mariana nodded, feeling the truth of Clara's words settle deep within her. "I know," she replied, her voice soft, "but I need to be careful. If Rachel finds out, she'll take everything away. She'll make sure I never see Lucas again." Clara reached out, placing a comforting hand on Mariana's. "We'll find a way," she promised, her eyes filled with fierce determination. "But you're not alone in this, Mariana. I'll help you." In that moment, Mariana felt a surge of hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. The two of them had formed a quiet alliance, and for the first time, Mariana felt that escape was within reach. In the days that followed, Mariana took small but deliberate steps, setting in motion a plan she and Clara had carefully crafted. They would gather more evidence, more proof of Rachel's true nature, all while keeping up the appearance of compliance. Mariana began to keep a small journal, recording every threat, every unfair demand, every instance of Rachel's manipulation. She hid it carefully, in a place only she could reach, knowing that these words could one day serve as her voice if she ever needed them. Clara, too, was watchful, helping Mariana document Rachel's behavior in subtle ways. On days when Rachel was particularly cruel, Clara would be there, a silent witness to the truth. With each entry in her journal, Mariana felt herself reclaiming pieces of her life. Her voice, though still hidden, was beginning to find strength. Rachel, however, sensed the shift, though she couldn't pinpoint its source. She began scrutinizing Mariana more closely, finding reasons to criticize her at every turn. "Is this how you fold the laundry, Mariana?" she'd sneer, her tone laced with contempt. "I expected better." But Mariana simply nodded, her expression calm, refusing to let Rachel's words cut her. Then, one evening, Clara sent a quiet signal, a small flicker of light from her front window, a sign they had agreed upon. It meant Clara had uncovered something important. Mariana's pulse quickened as she watched from her bedroom, her mind racing with possibilities. She could only wait until morning to speak with Clara, her anticipation building through the night. The next day, during a rare moment when Rachel was out, Mariana crossed the street to Clara's house. Inside, Clara handed her a document she had managed to acquire. A background report confirming Rachel's previous alias, her record of unpaid debts, and a restraining order from an old business partner. Mariana's hands trembled as she read, her eyes widening at each line. Rachel had hidden more than Mariana could have imagined, and this paper was the key to exposing her lies. "This is it, Mariana," Clara said, her voice low but firm. "With this, Lucas will have to see the truth." Mariana nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief and fear. She knew that exposing Rachel's past would shatter Lucas's trust, that it would turn his life upside down. But she also knew she couldn't continue in silence, couldn't remain invisible while Rachel controlled her every move. With Clara's support, she finally had the power to act, to reclaim her voice and the life she deserved. That night, as Mariana returned home, she felt a strength within her she hadn't known she possessed. She had taken the first true steps toward freedom, toward breaking Rachel's hold over her life. And though the road ahead was uncertain and filled with risk, Mariana knew that she had allies, a plan, and the truth on her side. She was no longer just surviving. She was fighting, and for the first time, she felt victory within reach. With each step Mariana took toward freedom, the risks grew. She and Clara had quietly gathered enough evidence to expose Rachel's past and present cruelty, and a faint light of hope had begun to brighten Mariana's days. But as she came closer to revealing the truth, Rachel seemed to sense something shifting. Her patience wore thinner, her tone grew sharper, and Mariana's every move was met with a scrutinizing gaze. It was as if Rachel's control was slipping, and she knew it. But rather than back down, Rachel tightened her hold. One evening, after Lucas returned from work, Rachel suggested that Mariana take on more chores to stay active. Mariana's body, already weary from her days of work, resisted, but she knew arguing would bring more trouble. She simply nodded, forcing a smile and suppressing the frustration that rose within her. The tasks were grueling, more than she'd been asked to do before, scrubbing the garage floor, dusting the high cabinets, and hauling bags of discarded items. It was as if Rachel was testing her, pushing her to the edge. But Mariana kept her composure. She knew that her endurance, her quiet strength, was the only thing keeping her afloat. She documented every new demand in her journal, recording Rachel's words, her threats, her cold remarks. Each entry became a small act of rebellion, a way to stand her ground without confronting Rachel directly. She reminded herself that soon all of this could end, that the truth would bring her peace, and that she'd no longer be under Rachel's thumb. Then, one rainy afternoon, the first major setback struck. Mariana had planned to meet Clara at the grocery store to exchange documents. She needed Clara to keep some of the more incriminating evidence safe. But as Mariana reached for her coat by the door, Rachel appeared, blocking her way. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion. "I was just going to pick up a few things for dinner," Mariana replied as calmly as she could, hoping Rachel wouldn't question her further. "I'll go instead," Rachel said firmly, her eyes narrowed. "You stay here. I wouldn't want you getting too tired." The coldness in her tone made Mariana's heart sink. She knew Rachel wasn't offering to help out of kindness. This was her way of keeping Mariana isolated, of ensuring she had no chance to escape her watchful eye. As Rachel left, Mariana felt a knot of frustration tighten in her chest. Her meeting with Clara had been postponed, and the documents she wanted to pass along remained in the house, hidden but vulnerable. It was a small setback, but it reminded Mariana just how precarious her situation was, how easily Rachel's control could disrupt her plans. That evening, Rachel was particularly cruel, snapping at Mariana over small things: a water stain on a glass, a slightly wrinkled shirt. Each criticism seemed to escalate, her voice growing louder, her tone sharper. Mariana could feel her own composure slipping, and when Rachel finally hissed, "You're lucky we're even letting you stay here," something inside. She looked up, meeting Rachel's eyes directly for the first time in months. "I'm here because I'm family," she said quietly, her voice steady, though her heart raced. "And that won't change." Rachel's expression darkened, and for a tense moment, neither of them moved. But before Rachel could respond, Lucas walked into the room, glancing between them with a puzzled look. "Everything okay?" he asked, sensing the tension. Rachel's face softened immediately, her voice switching to a sweet sympathetic. "Oh, of course, honey. We were just talking about all the work around the house. Your grandma insists on doing so much," she said, casting a pointed look at Mariana. Mariana held back her frustration, watching as Rachel twisted the situation, making herself appear patient and understanding while painting Mariana as stubborn and overbearing. She bit her tongue, knowing it wasn't the right time to reveal the truth. Not yet. The following days were a blur of tension and silence. Mariana kept her interactions with Rachel to a minimum, staying focused on her tasks while keeping the evidence hidden and safe. Clara, sensing the setback, left a small note on Mariana's doorstep one morning. "I'm here. Be careful. We're almost there." The message reignited Mariana's strength, reminding her that even setbacks couldn't erase the progress they'd made. But Rachel's behavior became increasingly erratic. She began imposing strange new rules, like forbidding Mariana from answering they. Her paranoia seemed to escalate with each passing day, and Mariana sensed that Rachel's grip was slipping. Her own desperation to maintain control had made her reckless, and Mariana knew it was only a matter of time before her behavior would raise suspicions, even in Lucas. One night, as Mariana lay in bed, she heard the faint sound of Rachel's voice from down the hall, speaking quietly on the phone. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was tense, almost angry. Something in Rachel's voice chilled her, and Mariana knew that she needed to be more cautious than ever. Rachel's suspicions were growing, and the closer she came to the truth, the more unpredictable she would become. Mariana clutched her journal close, her resolve stronger than ever. This was a setback, yes, but it wouldn't stop her. She had come too far to give up now, and with Clara's support, she knew she would find a way to expose the truth. She reminded herself that even the darkest nights eventually led to dawn, and though the path was treacherous, her steps were now guided by a determination that even Rachel's cruelty couldn't break. She would be ready. The truth was within reach, and Mariana knew that, even with Rachel's games and manipulations, her spirit was too strong to be defeated. Mariana's endurance was wearing thin, but her alliance with Clara had become her lifeline, her source of strength. Despite Rachel's escalating attempts to keep her isolated, Mariana held on to the knowledge that Clara was watching, that she was no longer alone in her fight. Clara too had grown cautious, choosing only brief encounters to share updates or strategies for their plan to expose Rachel. Each meeting filled Mariana with renewed hope, even as the risks increased. One rainy afternoon, as Rachel left to run errands, Clara appeared at Mariana's door. She wore a hooded coat, her face serious but warm. "I have something for you," she said, handing Mariana a slim, unmarked envelope. "A friend of mine works in legal services." She managed to pull up Rachel's full record. "There's more there than we thought, Mariana. This could be the proof we need." Mariana's hands trembled as she took the envelope, carefully hiding it in her apron pocket. She could feel the weight of Clara's words, the significance of the documents within. These papers were a tangible reminder of Rachel's lies, evidence that could finally set her free. "Thank you, Clara. I don't know how to repay you for all of this," she whispered, her voice thick with gratitude. Clara shook her head, her expression gentle but firm. "You don't owe me a thing, Mariana. No one deserves what you've been going through. We're going to make sure you get your life back." They exchanged a quick, understanding glance before Clara slipped away, disappearing down the street as the rain began to fall harder. Back inside, Mariana quickly hid the envelope in her room, placing it behind a loose floorboard she'd discovered. She knew Rachel wouldn't look there, and for the first time Mariana felt a deep, steady calm. She had allies, and now a weapon, a way to finally confront Rachel with the truth, if the moment came. But even with these plans in place, the next days were filled with tension. Rachel's behavior became erratic, her mood shifting from icy silence to bursts of anger. She imposed strange, restrictive rules on Mariana, demanding that she ask permission before leaving any room, and forbidding her from talking to the neighbors at all. Mariana complied outwardly, her demeanor calm, but internally she braced herself for what she knew would come. Then one evening, Rachel confronted her with a fierceness that Mariana hadn't yet seen. "I know you've been talking to that woman across the street," she hissed, her voice sharp and full of accusation. "Do you think I'm a fool, Mariana? Do you think I don't see what you're doing?" Mariana took a steadying breath, refusing to look away. "I'm not doing anything wrong, Rachel. Clara is just being kind." Her tone was firm, and for the first time she felt the power of her own voice, a quiet defiance that she could see unsettled Rachel. Rachel's face twisted with anger, her voice dropping to a cold whisper. "If you don't stop this nonsense, I'll make sure you're gone. Do you understand me? You'll never see Lucas again." The words stung, but Mariana stood her ground. Inside, she clung to Clara's promise, to the documents she had hidden safely. Rachel's threats, while terrifying, no longer held the same power over her. She had allies now, and she knew Rachel's true nature. She was a woman driven by fear, by the need to protect her secrets. The next day, Clara took another bold step to help. She arranged for Mariana to meet her friend, Linda, who worked as a social worker and had experience in cases involving elder abuse. They met at a small cafe, Linda's demeanor calm and reassuring as Mariana shared her story. She spoke of the isolation, the threats, and Rachel's cruel manipulation, her voice shaking but steady. Linda listened carefully, her eyes filled with empathy. "We can file a report, Mariana," Linda offered gently, "but only if you're ready. This report could bring people in to investigate, to make sure you're safe. You have options." Mariana felt a flicker of hope mixed with fear. Filing a report would be a final step, an irreversible decision that would bring everything into the light. She looked at Clara, who nodded supportively, her presence a steady reassurance. "I'll think about it," Mariana said, her voice soft but resolute. She knew that this choice was hers, that Clara and Linda were there to support her in whatever path she decided to take. The strength of this alliance filled her with courage. Back at home, she went about her chores with a new sense of purpose. Every demand Rachel made, every critical word she hurled, felt less powerful, as if she were losing her grip. Lucas remained unaware, caught up in his work, but Mariana knew that soon she'd be ready to reveal the truth to him as well. One evening, as she was folding laundry, she overheard Rachel talking on the phone in a low, urgent tone. "I don't care how much it costs. I need this taken care of, quietly," she said, her voice taut with stress. Mariana couldn't make out the details, but she sensed that Rachel was on edge, her desperation growing. It was then that Mariana felt a surge of confidence. With Clara, Linda, and the evidence they had collected, she knew that Rachel's hold on her was weakening. She was no longer a prisoner of Rachel's threats, but a woman surrounded by allies, people who saw her strength and worth. In the quiet of her room that night, Mariana took out Clara's original note and read it again. "You're stronger than you know." The words felt more true now than ever. She was stronger, braver, and she was ready. For the first time, the future felt open, within reach, a place where she could reclaim her dignity and peace. She folded the note carefully and placed it beside her heart, a reminder that even in her darkest hours, she had not been alone. With each day that passed, Mariana's resolve grew stronger, and the quiet alliance she shared with Clara and Linda gave her the confidence to prepare for what lay ahead. She knew that confronting Rachel would be dangerous, but the time for silence was over. The hidden documents, the journal she kept documenting each cruel demand and threat, and her newfound support outside the home had all become a part of her carefully laid plan. She would face Rachel head-on, but only when Lucas was there to hear the truth. One chilly evening, after Rachel and Lucas had gone to bed, Mariana sat alone in her small room, gathering the documents and her journal into a small bundle. She took a deep breath, running her fingers over the papers, each page a testament to the pain she had endured, but also to her strength. She knew this evidence would be enough to expose Rachel's lies and manipulation, enough to break free of the silence she had been forced to live in for so long. But she also knew that Rachel would not give up without a fight. The coming confrontation would likely be the hardest moment of her life. The next morning she met briefly with Clara, sharing her plan in whispered words as they stood by the fence between their houses. Clara's face was tense but supportive, her eyes reflecting both pride and worry. "Are you sure you're ready, Mariana?" Clara asked gently. Mariana nodded, her expression firm. "I am. I can't live like this anymore. It's time." Clara squeezed her hand. "Remember, Linda and I will be nearby if anything goes wrong. Just say the word, and we'll be there." Mariana felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She was no longer alone, and that knowledge steadied her heart. She thanked Clara, then returned to the house, keeping her steps light and her expression neutral as she moved about her chores. That afternoon, she approached Lucas, who was in his home office. "Lucas, could we all have dinner together tonight? I'd like to talk with you and Rachel about something important," she said, her voice calm but resolute. Lucas looked up, slightly surprised. "Of course, Grandma. Is everything okay?" She forced a gentle smile. "Yes, everything's fine. I just think it's time we all sat down and had a talk." He nodded, his expression softening. "All right, we'll make it a special dinner." As she prepared the meal that evening, Mariana's hands trembled slightly, but her resolve remained unshaken. She set the table carefully, each plate and glass meticulously placed, a quiet ritual to calm her nerves. Rachel came into the kitchen, eyeing Mariana suspiciously as she served the dishes. "This is a lot of effort for just the three of us," Rachel said, her voice sharp with mistrust. But Mariana kept her face neutral, refusing to let Rachel see the fire within her. When they finally sat down to eat, the air was thick with tension. Mariana kept her gaze steady, waiting for the right moment, feeling the weight of the evidence tucked safely into her lap. Lucas seemed oblivious to the tension, complimenting the meal and chatting about his day. But as the conversation waned, Mariana took a deep breath, her voice calm but firm as she spoke. "Lucas, there's something you need to know. About Rachel, about the way things have been in this house." Her words hung in the air, and Lucas looked at her, confusion flickering in his eyes. "Grandma, what do you mean?" he asked, his tone tentative. Rachel's eyes narrowed, and she forced a laugh. "Oh, Mariana, really? You don't want to start with this nonsense, do you? We're having such a nice evening." Her tone was mocking, her eyes cold, but Mariana felt no fear. She carefully set the papers on the table, her hand steady as she gestured to them. "These documents tell the truth," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I found out about your past, Rachel. The debts, the lies. I kept records of every threat, every demand, and every time you tried to silence me." Lucas's face paled as he looked at the papers, the shock and disbelief clear in his eyes. He turned to Rachel, his voice shaking. "Rachel, is this true?" he whispered, his voice a mix of confusion and hurt. Rachel's face hardened, her carefully constructed mask crumbling. "Lucas, she's just trying to cause trouble. She's old and confused. She doesn't know what she's talking about," she said, her voice venomous. But Lucas wasn't convinced. He picked up one of the documents, his eyes scanning the words, his expression darkening as he realized the truth. Mariana held her breath, watching as Lucas's gaze shifted from the papers to Rachel, the weight of betrayal settling over him. "How could you do this to my grandmother?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Rachel's calm cracked entirely, and she turned on Mariana, her voice a low hiss. "You think you've won? You think he's going to choose you over me?" Her voice was cold, her eyes full of fury, but Mariana held her ground, meeting Rachel's gaze with unwavering strength. "I don't need to win, Rachel. I just need my freedom," she replied softly, each word a final act of defiance. Lucas looked between them, his eyes filled with anger and sadness, before reaching out to hold Mariana's hand. "I'm so sorry, Grandma. I had no idea," he said, his voice breaking. The truth was finally out. As the realization settled in, Mariana felt the weight of years of silence and suffering lift from her shoulders. She had found her voice, her courage, and her strength. The road ahead was uncertain, but she knew she would no longer walk it alone. With the truth finally exposed, a thick silence fell over the dining room. Lucas's hand trembled as he held Mariana's. His face twisted with disbelief and pain as he processed everything she had revealed. Rachel sat across the table, her expression unreadable, her eyes sharp and unyielding as she calculated her next move. Mariana could feel Rachel's gaze burning into her, but this time she felt no fear. She had faced her, broken the silence, and her voice, once buried under years of intimidation, had finally shattered the grip Rachel held over her life. After a moment, Lucas turned to Rachel, his face pale. "How long has this been going on?" he asked, his voice low but intense. "What have you done to my grandmother?" His words cut through the tension, demanding an answer, and for the first time, Rachel seemed at a loss. Her mask of calm, the carefully crafted facade she had worn for years, was slipping. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was filled with forced sweetness, an attempt to manipulate one last time. "Lucas, she's confused," Rachel said, her voice wavering. "You know how she can be, always imagining things, always getting things mixed up. She's lonely, that's all. You're just misunderstanding the situation." But Lucas shook his head, his jaw clenched, the hurt evident in his eyes. "I don't think she's confused at all, Rachel. These aren't misunderstandings. These are threats, manipulations, and lies." He glanced at the documents on the table, the evidence he could no longer ignore. "Why didn't you tell me about your past? About the debts, the other things?" Rachel's face twisted, the last of her patience evaporating. Her voice turned cold, stripped of its charm. "Because it's none of your business," she spat, dropping all pretense. "I did what I had to do, and if your grandmother here hadn't been so ungrateful, so meddling, none of this would have happened. I took her in, I gave her a place to stay, and this is how she repays me." Mariana felt a surge of anger but kept her voice calm. "I am your family, Rachel. But to you I was never anything more than a burden." She looked at Lucas, her voice breaking slightly. "I tried to tell you, Lucas, I did, but she kept me silent, afraid that if I spoke out, she'd send me away, cut me off from the last family I have." Lucas's face was a mixture of sadness and rage, his gaze shifting between Rachel and Mariana as he pieced together the truth. He stood, his voice trembling with emotion. "You lied to me, Rachel. You lied to my face every day, and I trusted you. But this, I can't forgive this." Rachel's face darkened, and she pushed herself up from the table, her voice laced with fury. "You don't get it, Lucas. She was in the way. Everything we've worked for, everything we have, it was all for us, not for her. You think I wanted this? A life tied down, burdened by someone else's problems?" Lucas shook his head slowly, his expression one of profound disappointment. "No, Rachel. The burden here has been hers, and it ends tonight." He turned to Mariana, his eyes softening. "You're coming with me, Grandma. I'll make sure you're safe from now on." But Rachel was not finished. In a final act of desperation, she lunged forward, grabbing the documents off the table, clutching them tightly in her hands. "You're not going anywhere with those," she hissed, her voice filled with venom. "If you think you can just take everything away from me, you're wrong." Mariana met Rachel's eyes, calm but unyielding. "The truth is out, Rachel. It doesn't matter if you destroy those papers. Lucas knows everything now, and you can't take that away." For a moment, Rachel's expression wavered, and a flicker of defeat crossed her face. She looked at Lucas as if hoping he might soften, but his face remained stern, his decision final. She released the documents, letting them fall to the floor, her shoulders sagging under the weight of her own undoing. In a last, desperate attempt to regain control, she turned to Lucas, her voice breaking. "Lucas, please, we can fix this. Don't you see? We don't need her." Lucas shook his head, his voice quiet but resolute. "No, Rachel. I don't know who you are anymore, and I don't want to. You had a chance to be family and you threw it away. I'm done." With that, Lucas took Mariana's hand and led her out of the room. Mariana felt the weight of years of silence lift as she followed him, her heart swelling with a sense of freedom she hadn't felt in years. Behind them, Rachel's quiet sobs filled the empty room, a sound that once might have evoked sympathy in Mariana, but now brought only a sense of release. Outside, the night air was crisp and cool, and Mariana breathed deeply, savoring the taste of freedom. She glanced at Lucas, who wrapped an arm around her shoulders, guiding her away from the house and the memories it held. "I'm so sorry, Grandma," he whispered, his voice thick with regret. "I should have seen it sooner." Mariana shook her head, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "It's over now, Lucas. That's all that matters." She looked up at the stars, a soft smile breaking across her face. "I'm finally free." As they walked toward a future unknown, but filled with possibility, Mariana felt a deep gratitude, not only for the strength she had found within herself, but for the allies who had helped her break the chains of silence. The journey ahead might be long, but she knew she would walk it with dignity, her spirit intact, her voice strong, and her heart finally at peace. As the days passed, Mariana began to feel the full weight of her newfound freedom. Rachel had left the house in a final storm of anger and bitterness, her threats and manipulations no longer able to hold any power over Mariana. For the first time, Mariana could breathe deeply, moving through the house without the constant dread of Rachel's presence. Lucas, too, had distanced himself from Rachel, his heartbreak evident, but his loyalty to his grandmother unwavering. He had vowed to help her rebuild her life, and every day he showed her his support, his love, and his gratitude. In the quiet mornings, Mariana would sit by the window with her tea, feeling the sunlight on her face as she allowed herself to be fully present. The fears that had haunted her for so long felt distant, like memories from a past life. She could now listen to the sounds of the neighborhood without worry, see Clara across the street without fear of reprisal, and even leave the house whenever she wished. Each of these simple freedoms felt like a small victory, a reminder of the strength she had discovered within herself. One afternoon, Clara invited her over for tea. Clara's warmth and pride in her was a comfort, and as they sat together, Mariana felt a surge of gratitude for her friend's steadfast support. Clara smiled, pouring tea as she asked, "How does it feel, Mariana, to finally be free?" Mariana took a moment, gathering her thoughts. "It feels incredible, Clara," she replied, her voice steady. "I had forgotten what it felt like to live without fear. I feel like I've reclaimed myself." Her words held a weight, a finality that felt like closure. Clara reached across the table, taking Mariana's hand and giving it a gentle squeeze. "You've been through so much," Clara said softly, "but you've come out stronger. You deserve this peace." As the weeks went on, Mariana and Lucas found a new rhythm. Lucas, ever attentive, would join her for coffee each morning before work, and he made sure to be home for dinner each night. Their conversations grew deeper, more honest, and Mariana felt a renewed bond with him that had been lost in the years of silence. Lucas apologized countless times for not seeing the truth sooner, but Mariana would gently reassure him each time. "What matters is that we're here now, Lucas," she would say, her hand resting on his arm. "We have each other, and that's enough." Lucas began encouraging her to reclaim parts of herself that had been buried under years of isolation. He suggested she return to some of her old hobbies, things she hadn't had time for in Rachel's household. Mariana began to rediscover her love for gardening, filling the backyard with pots of flowers and herbs. She spent mornings tending to the plants, feeling the soil between her fingers, savoring the quiet joy of nurturing life. Each new bloom felt like a small symbol of her own rebirth, a reminder of the resilience she had carried within her all along. One day, Lucas surprised her with a set of art supplies, having remembered that she once loved to paint. "I thought you might like to try it again, Grandma," he said, his face lighting up as he handed her the gift. Mariana felt a surge of joy, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had almost forgotten that part of herself, the young woman who would spend hours lost in colors and creativity. She spent afternoons by the window, painting scenes of flowers and fields, the strokes on the canvas a celebration of her freedom and transformation. With time, even the memories of Rachel began to fade. Mariana's journal, once filled with entries of pain and endurance, had transformed into a place of gratitude. She wrote about her days, her walks with Clara, her time spent with Lucas, and her dreams for the future. The pages were filled with hope and healing, her words no longer weighed down by fear, but lifted by possibility. Each entry became a tribute to the life she had reclaimed, a life she would cherish and protect. In the evenings, she would take slow walks around the neighborhood, nodding at familiar faces, finally free to be part of the world around her. She found a small community in her neighbors, and Clara would often join her, the two of them walking side by side, sharing stories and laughter. The neighborhood felt different now, warmer, more welcoming, as if it had been waiting to embrace her all along. Lucas saw the change in her too. One evening, as they shared dinner, he looked at her with a smile, his eyes bright with admiration. "You look different, Grandma," he said softly, "happier, lighter." Mariana smiled, feeling the truth of his words. "I am Lucas. I am finally living the life I was meant to live." Her voice was filled with quiet pride, a peace she had fought hard to earn. In the quiet moments, she would still reflect on the journey that had brought her here, the years of silence, the hidden strength she had found, and the allies who had lifted her up when she couldn't stand alone. She understood now that her life was a testament to resilience, a story of quiet courage, and she would carry that knowledge with her always. As the seasons changed, Mariana's spirit blossomed alongside the flowers in her garden. She knew she had overcome something dark and powerful, and that her life was now her own to shape and cherish. Each day was a small victory, a new beginning, and Mariana walked forward into this next chapter with a heart full of gratitude and hope, knowing that she had at last found her way home. Mariana's freedom had brought with it a profound sense of relief, but as life settled into a quieter rhythm, she found herself reflecting deeply on the past and the impact it had left on her. Though Rachel was no longer a presence in her life, the scars of those years lingered. Late at night, when the house was quiet and Lucas had gone to bed, Mariana would sit alone by the window, gazing out at the streetlights and the shadows beyond, remembering the darkness she had once endured and the strength it took to finally escape. Her thoughts would sometimes drift back to the moments of fear and isolation Rachel had inflicted upon her, the relentless demands, the subtle but sharp reminders that her worth was conditional. She would remember the ache of holding herself back, of swallowing her pain to avoid Rachel's wrath, and the silence that had slowly eroded her sense of self. But each memory, though painful, served as a reminder of how far she had come, of the strength she had uncovered within herself, and the peace she now treasured. Lucas, too, had been processing the reality of what had happened. Their relationship had grown closer, their bond deepening as he came to understand the pain his grandmother had endured in his home. He often expressed guilt, wishing he had seen Rachel's true nature sooner, and Mariana would reassure him gently, her voice steady with understanding. "You were deceived by someone you trusted," she would say softly. "I was too, but that's behind us now." One evening, Lucas brought up the idea of speaking with a counselor about everything they had experienced. "I think it could help us both, Grandma, to make sense of it all, to really heal," he suggested. Mariana felt a moment's hesitation, but then realized that, after everything, she had nothing left to hide. She agreed, and together they began meeting with a therapist who helped them navigate the complex emotions left in Rachel's wake. Through these sessions, Mariana uncovered layers of strength and resilience she hadn't even known she possessed. She learned to see herself not as a victim, but as a survivor. With Lucas's support and the compassionate guidance of their therapist, she began to understand that her journey was one of incredible courage. Each painful memory became a marker of the strength that had kept her going, a testament to the quiet bravery she had shown through years of hardship. One day, during a session, the therapist asked her, "Mariana, when you look back on your story, what do you see now?" Mariana paused, reflecting deeply before she answered. "I see someone who was stronger than she knew," she replied softly. "I see a woman who kept going, even when it felt impossible. And I see a life that was waiting to be lived once I found my way out." Her answer seemed to resonate with Lucas, who nodded, his eyes bright with pride. After the session, as they walked home together, he turned to her, his voice quiet. "I'm so proud of you, Grandma, for everything you endured and for the life you're building now." Mariana smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. In the days that followed, she continued reflecting on her journey. She found herself reconnecting with old friends and even reached out to family members who had been distant during those years of isolation. She shared pieces of her story with them, and in turn, they welcomed her back with open arms, offering her a renewed sense of community and belonging. Each conversation, each reconnection was a step toward healing, a reminder that her life was filled with people who loved her and who valued her presence. Her friendship with Clara also deepened in these months, the two of them often meeting for tea or an evening walk. They shared stories of the past, laughed over small moments of joy, and found comfort in the simplicity of each other's company. Clara had been her first lifeline, and Mariana was grateful each day for the bond they had forged through kindness and courage. Clara, ever supportive, would often remind her, "You're an inspiration, Mariana. You showed me and everyone around you what real strength looks like." As Mariana moved forward, she continued to cultivate the garden she had started in Lucas's backyard. She spent hours tending to it, planting flowers that bloomed in bright colors, a symbol of her transformation. The garden became her sanctuary, a place where she could reflect on her journey and honor the resilience that had carried her through. She saw each flower as a reminder of the new life she had created, a testament to the growth that had emerged from her pain. Over time, Mariana found herself filled not with bitterness, but with a sense of peace. She no longer carried the anger or resentment that Rachel had once inspired. Instead, she held a quiet understanding, a forgiveness of sorts, knowing that Rachel's cruelty was a reflection of her own fears and insecurities. Mariana's strength, her dignity, and her grace had outlasted Rachel's control, leaving her with a heart open to healing and growth. With each passing day, Mariana embraced her life with a renewed spirit, grounded in the knowledge that she had not only survived, but had emerged stronger, more compassionate and unbreakable. She had learned to reclaim her voice, to protect her peace, and to live fully in the freedom she had fought so hard to win. The road had been long and difficult, but Mariana now stood on solid ground, her future bright, her heart full, and her soul at rest. In the months that followed, Mariana found herself flourishing in ways she had never expected. Her days were filled with simple joys, tending to her garden, hosting dinners for Lucas and Clara, and occasionally joining neighborhood gatherings where she was met with warmth and kindness. The dark chapter with Rachel became a distant memory, a reminder of the strength she had reclaimed. The flowers she had planted in Lucas's backyard bloomed brightly, a testament to the resilience that had guided her through her darkest hours. Lucas, forever grateful for the bond they had rebuilt, became an attentive companion in Mariana's life. He often took her on small trips around Oregon, showing her the coastlines, parks, and vibrant neighborhoods she'd once only heard about. Their connection had grown into something deeper, rooted in mutual respect and understanding, and Mariana cherished the time they spent together. She felt her heart expand with each shared moment, grateful for the family that surrounded her and the peace that now filled her life. As the seasons changed, Mariana embraced the life she had reclaimed. In her journal, once filled with sorrow, she now wrote about the beauty of each day, her hopes and dreams for the future. She closed each entry with a reminder to herself, "I am here, I am free, and I am stronger than I ever knew." For Mariana, her journey had come full circle, and she knew that whatever life would bring, she was ready to face it with courage and grace.